clearly influenced that band I hate.
What's up, everybody? Welcome back to Listography. Jason, Joe, and Crams are here, and today we are ranking the relatively small discography of the highly influential band Velvet Underground. Did any of us ever pick a Velvet Underground? Did you have them on Albums of the Year, Cram?
Yeah, in 67, I had the debut.
I think that may have been the only instance. I don't think they've appeared on Songs of the Year yet. As of recording this, we are up to 71 in that series, and I don't imagine anyone will be picking anything from Squeeze in 73. So not a super strong showing on some of those lists for us, but I guess we'll get into it and see if maybe it was just a matter of being in very strong years, or if perhaps some of us aren't the biggest Velvet Underground fans. As far as familiarity with the records, how were you guys going into it?
Not very. I know I've heard some of these songs and some of these albums kind of in the background when I went to like hipster parties, but I never in my life purposely put on a Velvet Underground album ever until this discography. Even when we were doing the Albums of the Year series, I knew in my heart that they weren't going to even come close to making it, so I didn't even bother. Just not my thing. And I like making fun of them a lot, so I didn't want to like listen to them, because then if I liked them, like it would kind of throw off my whole thing. So I kind of purposely avoided it. But this was an interesting experience.
Knew them all. First four were in pretty steady rotation for a while from when I was younger, and revisited them a little bit from time to time. Squeeze, I know I've listened to before, but it's not Velvet Underground, let's be honest. So yeah, the first four, heavy rotation all the time. Was always really into them the most, probably of all, not just three of us, but everyone we hung out with essentially. So had the banana shirt and all that, you know.
So I was I think I've heard the first four at least before, at least one time. Pretty familiar with the debut, less familiar with the subsequent ones, but know certain individual tracks from all of the albums pretty well. But it was good to go through, kind of get a refresher on everything and hear everything in context and chronologically. So yeah, it was fun to do. Should mention, I guess with this band, looking at some other lists and rankings online of what people include and what people don't include. Basically, our role is if it carries the name and it's a real studio album, we count it. Some people don't count Squeeze because it's just Doug Yule basically solo. And then there's later records, the VU record, which is kind of pulled together from some recordings that they did that they, I guess, intended to be a studio album, but they didn't use all of the tracks, and they took some tracks from other sources and kind of put them together into a compilation. So that doesn't quite fit the criteria, so we're not counting that. We're just going with the 5.
Yeah, but those songs could be nominated in 85, I suppose. Probably not, but we'll see.
All right, I'll start. I feel like their first 4 records are so highly regarded that putting any of them at the bottom is going to upset people. And almost everybody, I've never seen a Velvet Underground list that doesn't put Squeeze last. I imagine you might get 2 of them here today. I do not have Squeeze last. My last is going to be the sophomore record, White Light, White Heat. This one produced by Tom Wilson, who I guess co-produced with Andy Warhol the debut. This is the noisiest of the Velvet Underground records. So that fact alone makes it not a strong contender for me, and I imagine not a strong contender for Joe. But we'll see. Joe's full of surprises. But you can sort of see a lineage straight from this to a lot of like 80s shoegaze, noise rock, etc. Lyrically, I think it's really interesting. I think some of the song ideas are really cool. Something like The Gift is so unlike anything anyone else would do at the time, especially. It's just such a lack of tunefulness makes it really hard for me to get into and want to go back to and like listen to over and over. I feel like maybe if I listened to it a ton, like some of these ideas would just sort of work their way into my head, but I just don't want to give it that time because it's just really dissonant and noisy. I like the title track, White Light, White Heat, but to be honest, I prefer Mick Ronson's cover of it from his Play Don't Worry record. I'd rather listen to that than the Velvet Underground version. Here She Comes Now isn't bad either, but it's also not a song that I'm like excited about. It's not one of my favorite Velvet Underground songs. It's just like okay. And on this record, okay is like the standout. So not a record I love or that I will revisit very often. I've got it only at 2 stars, but it is the only Velvet Underground record that I would say I don't really like. All the rest I at least think are pretty decent.
Well, what happened was kind of what feared would happen when I listened to their discography. I really wanted to be like Jason and not put Squeeze at the bottom, but I got to put Squeeze at the bottom. I just think it's not very good. Like I really was like praying, like, please blow my mind. Like, please be better than people think. And I do think it's better than people think, but I just don't think it's that good or interesting. And like everything sounds kind of like stuff that people were doing, but just like imitation, like a kind of a pale imitation. Like Crash is really too cutesy. Like I kind of like the Elton John kind of style piano. And like I kind of feel like it's a predecessor to like a Queen song if they would have heard this album, which they probably didn't because nobody did. But it's kind of like that vein. And Caroline kind of is like Brian Wilson, super light. Friends like dabbles in some zombies-esque Baroque pop, but it's just like not anything special. I don't think it's like much worse than the other ones. Like I don't think, like everyone said, like this is such a disaster. Like it doesn't have the Velvet Underground sound, which to me, like I don't really care, but I can see why people put this at the bottom. It's just not that interesting. It's okay. I give it 3 stars, so it's probably higher than most people would expect for the bottom Velvet Underground from me. But it's an okay album. It's as much as I can say about it.
And that is what you're supposed to say about it. Apt, Joe. Very apt. Jason. This album, yeah, it's okay. It's 2.5 stars for me. That's like Joe's 3. It's definitely better than people say it is. I mean, it is in no way a Velvet Underground album. There's no John Cale. Maureen's not on it. Nico, Andy Warhol, and Lou Reed are nowhere to be found anywhere here. But it's not like a lost cause. It's not a train wreck. It's just fine. Doug Yule is content. He's a professional musician. He's fine, but there's nothing exciting about him. He doesn't have a lot of character. You know, that comes out under sort of like Lou Reed's guidance and the other. I'm like, he's fine. Like he comes out, sings the first song on his debut with the band. And he sounds great. And Ian Pace on drums here, the Deep Purple legend, just kind of makes this a much less experimental, more straightforward, just kind of like rock and pop rock kind of album. And you know, Joe's right, there's a little bit of Bowie sounds on here, Marshall Tucker Band, there's some The Band, there's some Elton John, there's some, you know, Brian Wilson type stuff. You know, probably my favorite song on here is Dopey Joe because it sounds like it could be a Bowie song. But yeah, it's definitely not nearly as bad as people think it is, but it's in no way other than the print on the front of the record or CD, a Velvet Underground album. So 2.5 stars. Squeeze, the bottom, number 5.
All right, Squeeze is my number 4. Like we said, essentially a Doug Yule solo album. You've got Ian Pace on drums and a couple, I think, uncredited female backing vocals, but other than that, it's pretty much all Doug. I think it's pretty much almost always just dismissed. No, like even the most hardcore Velvet Underground fans don't consider it a Velvet Underground album. I do, because you know what? It says the Velvet Underground on it, and that's all you need. And As far as putting it over White Light, White Heat, it's just got tunes. It's got melodies. I would much rather put this on than White Light, White Heat. I think it's enjoyable, but you guys aren't wrong. It's not an exciting record. I think the biggest difference between this and the previous record, Loaded, is just the lyrical depth is nowhere near anything that Lou Reed was capable of. And that's what really holds it back more so than the music. I think just lyrically not very interesting and, kind of plain, but, tuneful enough, kind of McCartney-esque in spots, especially on the closer, Louise. I like it. I think it's a good record. I don't think it deserves the total dismissal that it gets. I've got it at 3.5 stars. A good record.
Okie dokie. Kind of expected that from Jason. I wish I could have also not had at the bottom, but I got to be true to myself. Not that I like this one that much more. I got White Light, White Heat. Number 4. Definitely you can see why Jason wouldn't like this. I don't really like it, but there are some moments I think of like really greatness, especially on the title cut. I think it's fantastic. It doesn't really sound like anything else around. It's kind of got like that energy that it's like kind of a dirty energy, I would say, that's like different. It's got that New York sound. And as much as like, people always say Velvet Underground didn't sound like anyone else. I kind of feel like they did. Like I hear a lot of Birds and everything else, Zombies and Beatles, and there's little bits of everything. But I think what separates them and makes them stand out is just sort of like the debauchery and like the degradation that they would throw in there, like that really dirty New York underground sound, which I think is cool. But this album just doesn't have the tunes, I don't think, to hold up. I really hate The Gift. I think it's just awful. There's no way I will ever listen to it again. 8 minutes of stupid short story in one ear. The music and the right, I hate it. Hated every minute of it. But everything else is pretty decent. Like Lady Godiva's Operation, like lyrically, that's very ahead of its time. Sister Ray's cool, but like it didn't need to be 17 minutes. Like they're somewhere in here. I think there's a cool, good album. But I just don't think what they put on tape lives up to it. Like I got it 3 stars, and I love the title track, but everything else is just sort of like, it's cool and interesting and different. I just don't want to listen to it.
3 stars for this album from Joe is way higher than I anticipated, given his hype campaign and how he behaves in the comment section regarding Velvet Underground. So White Light, White Heat is also my number 4. I probably like it considerably more. My star rating is 3.5, which means I think it's really good. It's close to great. Good call. Yeah, it's got that ugly New York sound, but my preference is a little bit more of the melodic, more poetic kind of charm that you get in the first one because of Nico coming in, and I think Andy Warhol's influence. And then it comes to get back again later a little bit more. This one comes off as maybe a little bit too dark, a little too sour, a little too ugly at times. Not because of its content or its lyrics, but just because it kind of affects some of the tunefulness on it. It is a cool album in its whole, but it's really hard to find tracks other than, maybe Lady Godiva, the title track. And Here She Comes Now. Here She Comes Now is awesome, but it's way too short. I wish it was at least a few more minutes longer. I love his singing style there, the calm sway of the playing. It's just too damn short. I like The Gift a lot. I did immediately make a note, as I knew I would, that, I was like, I bet Joe cannot stand this right now. I'm picturing him listening to it just being like, but it's cool. It's not a radio single. It is what it is. I think the story is really cool. I love when they all go, ah, and he's talking about not getting a girl or whatever it is. Yeah, Sister Ray could be cut down, but it's still more tolerable than some like Grateful Dead jams for me. So I'll give it that. I Heard Her Call My Name is cool. I love that New York sound, as Joe says. It's especially on the title track. It's got like that spaz blues punk kind of mashup. It's so cool. And you can just, I mean, if you've ever read a music magazine ever, you know Velvet Underground and the influence they had on so many different things. And it's apparent when you listen to it. I mean, there's nothing wrong about it. It's hugely influential. But this one just doesn't have as much enjoyment and impressive nature that I would say the other three do, but I still really like it. 3.5 stars, White Light, White Heat.
All right. Next up for me is a record that maybe in the history of the channel was the hardest for me to decide placement and especially decide star rating. And that is the debut album, The Velvet Underground and Nico. This record is basically the birth of art rock. It influenced everything from punk, post-punk, garage, alternative, shoegaze, you name it, basically. And you can draw a line back to this record. Hugely important record, and I don't think you can overstate its influence. It's just extremely influential, important. And knowing all of that and acknowledging all of that, still very difficult for me to decide how good it is and how much I like it. I love the opener, Sunday Morning. I think it's fantastic. I also love the second track, I'm Waiting for the Man. Femme Fatale is pretty cool. Most of the record's decent after that. I don't love the songs in the middle section, but I think they're fine. I really cannot stand the closer, European Sun. It's basically like an ice pick in the ear. Cannot stand it. But for me, there's this major disconnect between kind of objectively trying to grade it and my subjective feelings on it. And anyone that's kind of brought this up in the comments about any record before has, I'm sure, heard from me on the subject. People saying like, I don't like it that much, but I objectively recognize that it's great. And normally I'll respond to that by saying, however you feel about it is how it is, because it's only subjective. There's no objectivity in music, but yet I can't deny its influence. But it's not a record I love. I think there's decent songs on it. I think it's pretty good. I don't think it's as good as people think it is. It's a 3.5 star for me. I don't know. The first two tracks are like 5-star tracks, and then the rest of the record is kind of, and then it closes with a 0-star track. So, and ultimately, I think all those decent songs back to back should result in a pretty good record. I guess it does. I don't know. I struggle with this one. I'm still kind of, I don't know how I feel. Is it? I don't know. 3. It's in the middle.
Okie dokie. It's a tough, albums like that are always tough to classify, because the more I think about like albums that are super influential and like everyone loves, like I want to give it more stars because like I know what it has done and the importance of it. So it is tough to kind of balance that with your own personal feelings. My number 3, however, is going to be the self-titled, not with Nico, just Velvet Underground. This one's okay. I don't know. This is the first one with Doug Yule, who I'd like in general. No John Cale. So it's a little less noisy and a little less art rocky. This one's a little more stripped back, a little folkier. I think the guitar is more noticeable. Pretty sparse accompaniment for the most part. But I just didn't catch much from this one. I like Jesus. Has some nice interwoven vocals. Murder Mystery sounds awful. Like I hate the way it sounds, but it's an interesting concept. After Hours is like cute little indie pop. You can definitely see that, popping up in Wes Anderson or like Juno or something. And I mean, there's some decent tracks. Like Candy Says sounds like the Doors to me. What Goes On has some cool like droney guitar, a little touch of organ. Jimi Hendrix, if Hendrix didn't really have any talent. And I don't know, people rave about Pale Blue Eyes, but that song just bores me to death. I think it's completely uninteresting. So I got this at 3 stars still. Like I'm still cruising through those 3 stars. And it's a little bit better because it's a little more melodic and a little more interesting, I think, instrumentally. Lyrically, I think it's like, I think lyrically is the strength of this band. I just don't really care most of the time about the lyrics unless there's some kind of like interesting or melodic or catchy or something going on with the instrumentation. And I just don't understand why people love albums like this so much. It just kind of sounds like, at least with the debut, like that's like original, interesting. This one kind of just sounds like other stuff around the same time without the hooks. So I got 3 stars. I don't understand the hoopla over this guy.
I think the lyrics are, other than Squeeze, the lyrics are constantly 5 stars, not just in, the presentation of the lyrics or the language or the formation, the style, but the content, like Joe talked about before. Like they talk about such ugly, degrading, just nasty topics a lot. And a lot of it is like anti-pop kind of sentiments, which I love. My number 3 is also the Velvet Underground self-titled 3rd album of theirs. So me and Joe falling in line. We are Velvet Underground buddies. However, I've got this one dangerously close to 5 stars. I've got it at 4.5. Doug Yule, right off the bat, fitting right in with Candy Says. He didn't carry over that star power really at all into Squeeze, but that's okay. What Goes On is really cool. This album has a lot of more different low-key vibes to it, a little bit more straightforward, not as much experimental. Like they aren't doing as much experimental sort of stuff, aren't doing so much avant-garde stuff, but they're never abandoning their sound. So it's really cool that they walk that line here. And I really like that this album is mostly ballads almost. Like it's kind of like a lovely, shadowy little album at times. Like it's just like marinated in like this dark romantic shadow. And then there's a few like more upbeat songs on here that kind of just like flip a traditional rock record on its head, where it's, mostly rock and stuff. Then you've got your lower, softer stuff. This one's totally opposite. And I think it works really well. I love Pale Blue Eyes to death. It's just a really good, reflective, mellow, melodic album for me. The upbeat stuff is great, like Beginning to See the Light, I absolutely love. And I don't think they get enough credit for, obviously for the style and all of that, they get, a lot of credit for being influential. There's a little more going on here with guitar than I think people give credit for. You can hear like early jangle kind of stuff here. And Joe mentioned the Byrds before, but, and obviously REM would cover There She Goes Again, but you can kind of hear like some of that guitar work that'll happen in college rock later on. We can go on and on about the influence of, these records. But you get a little bit of folk elements here too. Murder Mystery is cool. I like it a lot. And it's a throwback to old school Velvet Underground 2 years before this, which is kind of nice. And After Hours, by Maureen at the end is a nice little, just lovely little lullaby, wistful. And yeah, I know I like, other than this album, I've heard it somewhere in like some sort of like Bring My Daughter to College commercial or in Juno, like you said, like obviously just fit perfectly for that. Or, a montage going shopping through a thrift store or something in a 2007 indie comedy. But yeah, I think this album is tremendous. I just don't quite have it at 5 stars, but 4.5 for me. And yeah, I love how just kind of shadowy and mellow this album is, and so good for me. 4.5, Velvet Underground.
And my number 2 is another 3.5 for me, but actually I'm a lot more confident in this 3.5. So maybe I need to demote the debut and Squeeze down to 3. I probably should. But I've got the self-titled 3rd album, 3.5 stars. My number 2, like you guys said, it's a calmer, prettier side of the band. After White Light, White Heat, they had basically taken the noise as far as they could, and so they decided, we're not going to repeat ourselves. We're going to go the total other direction. And I much prefer this direction. I think Candy Says and Pale Blue Eyes are both lovely songs. Beginning to See the Light, catchy, infectious. I love the guitar interplay on Some Kind of Love. Story of My Life is sweet, tuneful. Moe Tucker on After Hours, completely charming. Sadly, once again, they decide to make the worst song on the album, by far the longest song on the album. Murder Mysteries, 9+ minutes. Like, I don't know why. Who's making this decision? Like, this song's total garbage. Let's stretch it out.
You try to solve a crime in under 9 minutes. Come on.
Without fail, the worst song on every record is the longest. But I think it's a really unified record. It works pretty nicely together, with the exception of Murder Mystery. I think everything flows together. Everything holds my interest. I don't get bored. Like I was saying on the debut record, I think the songs throughout the middle of Velvet Underground and Nico are all decent songs, but back to back, I zone out. But on this one, I stay sort of connected to it the whole way through. I think it's really enjoyable. 3.5 stars.
I think this is where Joe and I are going to diverge, but go ahead, Joe.
We'll see. I don't think you know me at all. My number 2, you do. But I think you're wrong, because I think I know what your number 1 is. My number 2 is going to be Loaded. This one's pretty good. Doug Yule has a little more, I think, to do with this one. Starts off with Who Loves the Sun, which is really pretty, fun little, 60s pop number. It's 1970 now, so they're 4 or 5 years behind the times. And I like it better when the Zombies and, the Left Bank did the same thing like 4 years ago. But it's pretty good. I like Doug Yule's voice. Sweet Jane, I like it better when Mott the Hoople sing it, but it's still a good song. Lose, his off-key singing is sort of hard to get used to. And I don't know, like, I feel like they'd be a really good band if they just like tried to make like a really straightforward rock record with their subversive nature kind of in tune. But I just don't think any of them are that good. I don't think Maureen Tucker's a very good drummer. I don't think Lou's a good guitarist. I don't think I ever noticed Doug Yule on bass. So I don't know. I just don't know what I'm supposed to grab onto here. New Age sounds like a song that Big Brother and the Holding Company would have done. And like, I know there's like a subversive edge to all of this, but are they like trying to play it more straight here? Like, are they trying to make some pop radio hits here? I don't know. Like Lonesome Cowboy Bill, I like, but it sounds like the Byrds, and like all this stuff kind of already happened. And I don't know, like, I think all of this are good songs. I just have no idea why people think they're great songs. Like, they're all good, like fine production work, fine band work. I just don't think they're nearly as talented instrumentally as their peers. And I guess if you really put a lot of stock in the lyrics, you'd like it more, because it does kind of have that dark arty rock kind of stuff still. But I just don't like it that much. I mean, it's good. Like, it's 3.5 stars. I'm moving up to 3.5 stars. But I do not get the hype around this or any of the other albums.
Well, to answer some of the questions you posed, you can't really just try to pick out parts that you think are cool that you want to learn. Like, I want to learn the bass part to New Age. Like, you got to take the sum of the parts and take it whole for what it is, for the presentation and the meaning behind it. But you're right. To me, the lyrics have always been the star of the show. There's a great marriage between the sound, the style, and the lyrics. And they've never intended to be a radio friendly for the masses band. I don't even think they've always wanted to be attractive to other people. They are just trying to present their ideas the only way they find they can, purely. But Joe and I are going to line up here. I've got Loaded at number 2, and this is their straightforward pop rock album. This is like their rock and roll album. I've got it at 5 stars. This is a classic, mainly because not just the lyrics, but this is easily Lou Reed's best performance with the band. He is just owning it here. He's got rock and roll swagger everywhere on this. Who Loves the Sun? Great poppy and kind of like anti-pop. I mean, it's about the sun, but it's not like Here Comes the Sun. It's just like, who cares about the sun? It's so just it's so subversive. I love it. Not everyone loves the sun. Sweet Jane, always a classic. I probably do also prefer the Mott the Hoople, but you got to respect the original, which I also think is a cool version. It's not like it's a big gap. Rock and Roll, amazing solo here. I just love it. I think Cool It Down is amazing. New Age, Lonesome Cowboy Bill is cool. I Found a Reason. Jason's artifact about the longest song always being the worst song does not fit the bill here, with Oh Sweet Nothing being the longest song on here. And just the way that this one is like straightforward and has like the spirit of rock, but also has like their dark kind of artsy swagger to it is so cool. And yeah, Lou is just on fire here. And I think they put a lot more attention to detail here in the craft than they did compared to Velvet Underground and White Light, White Heat, obviously. I mean, the songs are much more melodic than White Light, White Heat, but you still get some of that noisy sort of feel to it. But like the OOs and New Age and the harmonies and I Found a Reason, like there's just a little bit more paying attention to what brings out the best sort of elements in the songs that they've written. And I think they nailed it. It's a lot more loose. It sounds like, early Bowie, little glammy at times in that regard. And I think it's just fantastic. From 1970, another 5-star album. I've got a lot that year, and this was one of them. So it did not get nominated for me, but it's just because competition is competition. But yeah, 5 stars, Loaded. Number 2, Velvet Underground.
My number 1 is Loaded. And this was a conscious effort to make a more commercially successful record. The label asked for a record loaded with hits, and that is why it is called Loaded, allegedly. I think it retains the charm and the tunefulness of the previous record, but it just makes it that much, a little bit more slick and a little more polished, a little more studio sheen on it, which I think makes the songs shine all that much more. You also got a couple different types of sounds coming into the band here. You get a little more like folk and country coming into the tunes, especially on a song like Lonesome Cowboy Bill. I think the opening trio of songs are completely fantastic. Who Loves the Sun, Sweet Jane, and Rock and Roll. I don't think it really lets up too much from there either. I Found a Reason has one of Lou Reed's all-time best vocal performances. Oh Sweet Nothing, Cram's right. The longest song being the worst only applies to the first 3 records. Oh Sweet Nothing is excellent. Brings in kind of that country sound as well on that track, but sort of via the Grateful Dead. Almost sounds like a Grateful Dead track. But I just think it's a very solid record. Good songs the whole way through. 4 stars for me.
Yeah, moment of truth. Will Joe give a 4-star album to the Velvet Underground? He will. I'm gonna go 4 stars for Velvet Underground and Nico, the debut, because it is like it's very cool. I think this more than any other one has like a unique sound that I like. Like I know White Light, White Heat, very unique, like clearly influenced that band I hate, blanking on the name, Sonic Youth, all the noise rock and art rock, whatever. Blah, 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 blah. This one kind of kicks all that off, and it does it in like a rockin' kind of R&B way. It sounds like a good 60s rock album. Like there's a little R&B, there's a little like Dylan influence, and it starts off Sunday Morning, which I think is great. I love the Celesta piano backing, kind of like the Beach Boys on like really hard drugs, like not just like weed, but like heroin or like cocaine and stuff, which is cool. Like you get that gritty New York sound to it. And Lou Reed's definitely got a little bit of that Bob Dylan vocal styling, but I think it works on here. Some like swirly psychedelic pop as well. Waiting for My Man, classic song about buying heroin. It's got like a really nice strut to it, like it's kind of R&B. Which is cool. If Nico wasn't on this album, I'd probably have it a lot higher because just don't love her vocals. I don't love her pronunciations, especially on Femme Fatale. Like, it just kind of irks me. Kind of the same way with like Yoko. I don't know. Don't love it. But I think the rest of the songs are pretty strong. I think Venus in Furs is really cool. That droning electric violin from John Cale is really cool. Kind of got like a sinister tone, some stomping drums to it. I think that might be the most unique sounding song on the whole album. Very cool. Run 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 sounds like Buddy Holly on acid. And like a lot of these songs are kind of familiar, but like through this lens that I think only Lou Reed and John Cale and company could do. Like, I think they were the only ones in that mindset or bold enough to kind of take pop and R&B and rock and sort of flip it upside down in a cool way. So I definitely appreciate that. But I just wish Nico wasn't here, because she kind of, every time she's on, it's just like, I don't want to listen to this. But it's good. I like There She Goes. They admittedly stole from Marvin Gaye's Hitchhike, which is very cool. It's like this messed up version of pop and R&B, and that's my favorite of the Velvet Underground sounds. They kind of go too far, like Black Angel's Death Song, European Sun, not great. I don't hate it as much as Jason. Definitely some like Roger McGuinn, jangly, pseudo psychedelic guitar on it. So it's just a good album. Like, I'll do 4 stars. I'm not going to do any higher because of Nico, but some cool stuff. Very cool. I think it's probably more cool than like good in my mind, but like it has all the necessary elements for a 4-star album. So I'm gonna give them the 4 stars. I hate to do it because now I'm like a Velvet Underground fan, but whatever.
Wow, I am shocked scores got that high for Joe. Proud of you for that. Proud you said McGuinn correctly. However, I'm a little irked. Apparently, if you are a non-Anglo woman and trying to sing in English, Joe doesn't want anything to do with you. So look out, Eastern Hemisphere. I got it as my number 1. Don't remember the last time Joe and I shared an order ranking. Granted, only 5 albums. If we line up with Zappa, that'll be something. But we, number 1, easily the debut, Velvet Underground with Nico, nominated that year, and also got her Chelsea Girl on there. Yeah, I mean, you guys made, especially Joe, made some really good points. I really love what you said about, like, it's different. It doesn't sound like anything else, but it's still familiar. It's just like through a lens of a different perspective than we've ever got. It's just like seems like there was this big community of like rock and pop rock, and then there were these weirdos over in New York hanging out with Andy Warhol, and were confidently like, nah, this is how you do it. And it was just like, huh, yeah, that is kind of cool. That's kind of the reaction. But I love it. I think all of the songs are pretty much great. European Sun is my least favorite on it, but I don't hate it. I do like Black Angel's Death, but Sunday Morning is awesome. I thought it was bells, but I guess if it's the piano, it's great. I'm not great with instruments. That's my biggest weakness on the channel. I listen to something and I'm like, really like the banjo, and they're like, that's a kazoo actually, and I'm like, oh, okay, that's great. But yeah, the strings or the mellotron or whatever it is underneath is great. You get that great proto-punk style, and I'm Waiting for My Man. Lyrics on this and the content are just fantastic. I've read a lot of things about There She Goes Again being about prostitution, but I don't really see it that way. I see it more like anti kind of, especially with the hitter line, see it more like calling out like bros of the late 60s who like can't take it that their love interest or ex is like hooking up with other guys, and like, can you believe this? She's doesn't want me, she wants other guys. That's kind of how I always took it, but maybe it is. Other than that, a lot of drug use kind of stuff on here. Yeah, good call on what did you say, Buddy Holly on steroids or something?
Buddy Holly on acid, I think. Run 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 sounds like Buddy Holly on acid.
Yeah, I was thinking it's like kind of got that rebel 50s kind of, but like everything people in the 50s were afraid of, like with the beatniks and everything. They were like, well, this is it. It's very cool. And the thing that this album doesn't get enough credit for, I mean, everyone talks about how influential it is. Everyone talks about how different it sounds from everything else. But the variety from track to track on this album, I think, is really impressive. Nothing sounds like anything else on the album, which is really cool. And you get some easygoing stuff like There She Goes Again or Sunday Morning, but you also get really challenging stuff like Heroin, which is a really dark song, very challenging. And I like kind of how the pace goes kind of back and forth. Then the lyrics with like the laugh at the end and Heroin, it's my wife, it's my life. Their lyrics are just so brilliant. And I think Nico puts the perfect touch on this album. I think you need kind of her quality that comes in. It's like gentle, but like that Baroque strength too. Yeah, and just and even though European Sun isn't my favorite, I think it's, you know, cool to kind of just have this utter chaos of a closer, which kind of just fits the whole mood. No one talked about All Tomorrow's Parties, but I think that just like really rambunctious, nervous, like piano part throughout the whole thing is super cool. I love it. I think it deserves all of the acclamation that it gets. 5 stars for me. And my favorite Velvet Underground album. I will say I would have never guessed it would be Joe's favorite. And I absolutely knew Loaded would be Jason's. It's like a little Mott the Hoople album, Loaded.
I don't know about that, but yeah, kind of a no-brainer.
I do.
Any final thoughts, guys?
Do I have to stop making fun of them in the comments? Have I rated them too highly? Or does my difference with like the critical rating still allow me to kind of rag on them a little bit?
I mean, you can say whatever you want, but I mean, you're gonna get pushback now. I mean, you didn't even go that low for like the other albums. It's not like you're like White Light, White Heat. I can't imagine why anyone would ever want to listen to it. It's 1.5 stars. Like that's what I was expecting for almost everything. So this was good. This was good for me, in my opinion of you. It's good for you. Jason's not changed. He doesn't, you know, he's like a rock over there. He's constant like a northern star.
Yeah, Joe always does that. He goes in fully negative and comes out completely middle of the road, fair, balanced.
My problem is I read way too many critical reviews. Like I'm kind of a junkie in that regard. Like I love to read up on what Robert Christgau says and what everybody else, you know, says about these bands, and looking at like the Rolling Stone having 3 or 4 of their albums in the top 500 of all time. And that's kind of where I obviously fall well short of those. None of these albums were nominated. I never even considered it. None of these songs were ever considered for my songs of the year lists. But like, I just don't hate, like, I wish I hated stuff more than I do, but I don't. Like, I think all of this music is fine, but don't come at me saying this is one of the best bands of all time, because I will take you down.
They're not among my favorite bands. They're easily top 100 just because of the pedigree of the first 4, and because of their style. And I think the critics are right, especially when they talk about how influential, but I think they're dead wrong about how bad Squeeze is. I mean, it may have been disappointing that they put it out under the Velvet Underground label, but if you just said this is Doug Yule from Velvet Underground's debut solo record, there's no way it would be getting 1 star. Like, it's not that bad. I was looking at some of the star ratings, like AllMusic has it at like 1 star, and if you look closely, it's kind of like shaded off the full one, and it's like, really, this isn't a Kevin Federline album. Like, come on. It's Chase's 4th favorite Velvet Underground album, for God's sake.
There were moments where I was playing with putting it higher, but I had to restrain myself a bit. But there you go. That's the Velvet Underground for you. Thanks for watching, everyone. Let us know what you think of the Velvet Underground, what you think of our lists, how you rank the 5 studio albums. Hit the like button if you enjoyed the video. Subscribe to the channel if you have not subscribed yet. Check the description for links to all of our social media: Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. Check out our website. And come back tomorrow. We'll be sharing our top 10 favorite Velvet Underground songs each. Thanks for watching.